So good day, and thank you all for taking time from busy schedules to join us for yet another Global Performance Excellence webinar offered by IISE. We've done somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 of these over the last 3 years. It doesn't seem possible, but we've had a lot of fun putting these on. So I'm pleased to be joined by David Poirier and Jim Dobson today. We're going to focus, this is a continuation from our webinar that we had last week with Jim Tompkins. And Jim, as some of you know, presented on the topic of insightful leadership. And so we're going to sort of take that to the next step and zoom in and talk about how insightful leadership can play a role in our efforts to enhance productivity improvement in organizations during these challenging economic times. David is past president of IISE. I've known David for over 30 years, and he's been involved in a senior leadership position, helping organizations either internally or externally navigate disruptions and optimize the use of industrial and systems engineering and develop really solid, effective operational excellence programs for companies in retail, grocery, and distribution. And so, David, we're pleased to have you join us today and share your thoughts on this important subject.
Great, thanks, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
Jim is recently has spent 25 years with Disney, and he led the industrial engineering function and business planning. He is now with David at the Poirier Group and playing an active role in helping organizations to improve their operational excellence programs and drive even greater productivity using the things that he's learned and utilized as an industrial engineer over his career. Jim, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and David today.
We're going to, we have a number of partners that we work with to deliver this series of webinars we've done. Council on Industrial Engineers is a group that David's actually the chairman of. It's been around for over 30 years, some 22 senior leaders of the industrial engineering function in some form or fashion. It's called different things in different companies. Boeing, UPS, Intel, Disney, GM, just to name a few. And Tompkins Ventures, they are playing a key role in this short series of 3, 4, 5 webinars that we're going to be doing over the next month or two to discuss how organizations can continue to deal with this steady stream of disruptions that we're seeing in our world. Administratively, first, thanks for joining us. We'll share a little bit later in the presentation how to get access to the recording, to the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation. We'll have a YouTube version of this, and we'll have a blog. So we'll be sharing the links for you to be able to do that. I'd like you to use the chat function. I see some of you already started to do that, so thanks for, we appreciate you typing in your questions as we go, and I'll be monitoring those and I'll throw them at Jim and David as appropriate. And we'll tell you how to get a hold of Jim and David afterwards if you'd like to contact them, reach out to them, so we'll provide that at the end of the session. And some of you I know value certificates of participation in IISE. Will be mailing those out about a week after the webinar itself. So I want to put this session in particular today in context. Back in the spring of 2020, we did a series of webinars that were hugely successful. Jim mentioned how many people did we have registered for this one. We've got well over 200 from all over the world attending today. Back then, we had 800 people sign up for this thing because obviously COVID was a big black swan, a big deal, and people were really trying to figure out how do we manage through this. So we did a series of webinars, and the bullets that you see there give you a sense of what we provided to IISE members and customers. And during 2021 and early 2022, we've had another 45 or 50 webinars on various aspects of operational excellence, Industry 4.0, 5.0, organizational culture, operational excellence, integrated Lean Sigma, and on and on. And so this year, starting in September, we decided, in the face of all these new disruptions that seem to be manifesting themselves in the world around us, we decided to sort of refresh that series that we did back in 2020. And so Jim, back on the 19th of September, Jim did his webinar to kick off this series and focused on insightful leadership, surfing the waves to organizational excellence. Great webinar, and we'll tell you how to get access to that a little bit later in the thing. Today's webinar, we're going to focus on zooming in a little bit more on some of the principles that Jim shared with us back on the 19th. On the 6th of October, we'll have a session on business process management 4.0 and 5.0 migration strategies to create resilient operational excellence. And then in November, in December, we'll have a couple of even more specific and focused sessions that focus on what are the common failure modes in business process improvement initiatives and how do we address those. So we've got this series set up in the face of lots of disruptions that we face in our world around us. All of these webinars, all 90 of them, can be found on the IISC website. We will share that link with you. And they're broken into 10 categories. So those are the 10 boxes that we put them in, so to speak. So they're easy for you to access, they're on demand, and we've clustered those into packages, so to speak, and you can get a certificate in OpEx or Integrated Lean Sigma or Operational Analytics by looking at those recordings. So this is our storyline today, and we're going to do today a little bit different. I want to make sure that we leverage David and Jim's wisdom and insightful leadership. And so we're going to focus on a storyline that has 6 things, and I'm going to really be asking them a question. These are 6 modules of slides that we put together for you. We're not going to go through the slides. I'm going to ask David and Jim questions, and then I'll zip through those slides so that you have a sense of the content that's there, and I'll get to the next question. So it's a little bit different. I think you're going to like this format, and so let's get with it. Jim, Dave, you both saw Jim's presentation on the 19th, and he talked a lot about disruptions, and then disruptions create tipping points, which then oftentimes force paradigm shifts on the part of leadership, and then the requirement for insightful leadership. How do you see these disruptions, this steady stream of disruption? To me, it's, you think about a wave, it's parallel waves, but we've almost got like waves coming from different directions, merging together and sort of hitting you from all angles. How is it impacting how we utilize industrial and systems engineering and how we approach productivity improvement today?
Jim, you go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, no, Scott, I thought Jim's presentation last week was really good, and it brought to mind a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things haven't changed since we had these seminars in 2020. I love the way Jim takes a metaphorical approach to really telling his story, and that surfing analogy I thought was really good. But I thought the big takeaways for me from Jim's presentation were really where he talked about foresight, insight, and then, as you alluded to, that insightful leadership piece. And he used that surfing analogy to talk about foresight as that ability to predict which wave will be the next one to ride. And I love the analogy because it brought back memories of me being out in the ocean with my kids, and you're out there. We weren't surfing, but we were boogie boarding or what have you. And yeah, there's always that decision or inflection point of, should we get this wave or wait for the next one? And if you take this one now, you're not going to get one of the next 3 because you've already committed to this one. So really using that metaphor, I thought was really good in terms of how important that foresight is to really catch that right wave. And then he talked about the insight piece in terms of understanding, how the wave will break and how to make sure you maximize your success that way. So looking down the shore and finding the right place to really go after those waves. And then that insightful leadership I thought was good in terms of how do you get it done? You know, what's the action to get in front of the wave and harness that power and harness the energy of that wave. So I really like those components. I think there's a lot of applicability without jumping too far ahead of you here, Scott, in terms of dialogue and some of the things that we as leaders need to take from that type of conceptual conversation into practical action steps moving forward. So.
Yeah, and Jim, as you were talking about picking the right wave, the metaphor "pick the right wave" in when you're in a period where there's economic disruption, you know, if you think about profitability equals price recovery times productivity, that equation. So price recovery is raising your prices faster than your costs go up. When you're in a recessionary period, price recovery goes negative on us.
Yep.
You don't have the elasticity in the marketplace. So all you're left with is productivity. So the wave, picking the right wave, is picking the right productivity improvement projects.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that you see is in normal times, you can pick bad ones and get away with it. In hard times, difficult times, you really have to pick the right projects. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Yeah, and I think not only pick the right projects, but pick the right level of projects, because you have some opportunities where you'll go in and you'll just do productivity improvement within a facility or within an office or within a functional area. In other cases, you have to have a much broader view of things, depending how far the gap is between where you are and where you need to be. And you know, I think one of the other things that was a real takeaway last week as well is it struck me after Jim's presentation that, you know, pre-COVID, we tended to look at businesses as being cyclical. You know, maybe they were, you know, busy going into the holiday time or September, or they were busier in the summer, depending on what the nature of the business was. And if they faced disruptions, it was one disruption at a time, you know, and some internal disruptions, like the budgeting process, right? Or we got to hunker down and get through the budgeting process. And then after that, it was, you know, we really got to focus in because it's getting to our busy season. That's changed now, right? We not only have different size waves, but some of them are hitting us two at a time, you know, so the supply chain disruptions from, you know, as a result of what's going on in Europe and Ukraine, along with the remnants of COVID, you know, those are two waves that are still happening at the same time. And so we've had to become a lot more adaptive as leaders, as well as insightful. And that combination allows you to make quicker decisions with confidence.
Yeah. And one of our attendees, Julia, made a comment to everybody, the term that Jim used, optionality versus optimality. So, you know, you really need to be agile and be flexible and focus on giving yourself options, right? And, you know, do some scenario thinking, scenario planning, right?
I think you're right, Scott. And it really speaks to that transformation had to be broad, you know, not just in terms of business and how we pivot and make sure our products are viable and our business is resilient, but even down to just our own ways of thinking. You know, as industrial and systems engineering, everything's around optimization and how to really be precise, versus that whole concept of optionality became grossly apparent through COVID as companies had optimal supply chains that were broken and had no options for them. So that optionality concept, I think, really hits home.
Let's move on to the next question here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slip through some slides just to give the audience a sense of some of the material that we've provided that augments our dialogue. So we're not going to speak to these slides, but when you get a copy of the presentation, you'll be able to look at these, and hopefully some of these slides will fill in some blanks or some gaps. So I just pulled this from Jim's presentation, definition of black swans. We're going to use the term black swans. I've updated this slide with the latest black swan, so to speak, the economic issues and recession that we're facing. I threw this in because I like this. We had this in our slide in our presentation back in the spring of 2020. This is Dave. You know more about this than I do, but this is what is it? What is this?
Well, these are economic disruptions that we've gone through, so
Yeah.
cycles that we've gone through over time. So all this to say, it's not a lot different. It's impacting us more now because of the nature of what's going on, but these disruptions are going to happen. They're going to keep happening. They've been happening forever, and they're going to happen a little quicker, and our ability to deal with them ideally will get quicker as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of the underlying theme of today is, how can we cope with the increasing frequency of waves that are coming at us, and be adaptive to maneuver in the marketplace in a way that positions us well against our competitors, and more importantly, with our clients.
Right. And when I showed Dave this slide, I found this on the Internet of Things. I sort of liked it, and I got that surfing thing down there. That's a messy bunch of waves, right? So that's sort of probably the way it feels. Which one do I pick, Jim? I don't know. So, but Dave said maybe it's the decade of the 20s. Maybe it's the decade of black swans that we're up against. So if that's the case, then the challenge is really going to be, the emphasis is really going to be on how can people create resilient productivity improvement efforts that keep them competitive.
Yeah, it's interesting, Scott, as I kind of reflected on our dialogue for this morning. I was thinking pre-COVID, in the late 20-teens, a lot of focus on transformation and business transformation. And you could look at a lot of companies that were doing that, from Amazon to Uber to whomever. And everyone was enamored with this whole transformation idea. As a business, depending on where you played in the marketplace, you may or may not have had to, had your feet forced to the fire and transform. A lot of businesses hadn't, and sort of were sitting on the sideline watching how all of this transformation was playing out. Well, now as COVID's hit and disruptions have hit, and COVID is a disruption in the rearview mirror, but we have supply chain disruptions, to David's point earlier. We have labor market disruptions. We have economic volatility right now. We are getting hammered over and over and over again by those disruptions. And if you were sitting on the sidelines before, you're almost forced into the game now to really start thinking more from a transformational mindset and a disruption mindset, and how, as an organization, are you going to deal with that moving forward?
Yeah. Dave, you were going to jump in, I think. Could you?
Yeah, I think, and the reason why I want to emphasize the notion of the 2020s is, back to the old way that we did things. It'd be, this will be great to get this year behind us so that things are clear ahead, and it's just, the only reason it's clear is because we don't see the next wave coming, right? Mm-hmm. And so we got to get better at seeing those waves further out and get prepared for the fact that there are going to be multiple waves on.
Yeah. So more slides in here to sort of provide some backdrop for the conversation that Dave and Jim are having with me. And so I'm not going to, again, go through these, but I just want to, the one thing I will say about this one is, and I like this slide in that, if you think about business process maturity and competency management maturity, they go hand in hand. So the development of competency and the development of business process maturity, when you think about being business process maturity level 5.0, for example, in today's world, again, it's not an optimized business process, it's an agile business process, it's a flexible business process. So the definition, the scale, the way we think about business process maturity levels is changing because of the disruptions. Because the process isn't, again, it's not an optimized, fixed, rigid process. It's like you talk about football teams, right, Dave? The best football teams are disciplined, but they're not rigid, right?
Yeah, exactly. We've dealt with some of our clients and folks we work with that are somewhere between level 1 and level 2, and they say, I want to be level 4. I'm sure you do. How do we get there? Well, you get to level 2, then you get to level 3, then you get to level 4, and your whole organization won't get to the same level at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So let's move on to the second point in the storyline here. And this is a slide that's a visual of what I said a minute ago. So profitability equals price recovery times productivity. And the point is, in periods of economic disruption, in periods of recession, the factor in the equation, the leverage you've got is with productivity improvement. So you really got to step up your game in terms of knowing what to do, how to do it, and it's not an issue of whether you're doing productivity improvement, it's how fast are you doing it. It's because you can be improving, but if you're not improving fast enough, it doesn't matter. So that's the question that I think organizations need to think about, Dave, is left to our own devices, can we do it fast enough?
Yeah, and it's really that rate of change, the key metric for that.
And so what we know is that, and there's a little bit of a leap in logic here, but on the left-hand side, that's the slide straight out of Built to Last, right? So those are some 18 companies that Jim Collins looked at, and the visionary companies, and you can see how they outperformed the comparison companies significantly. On the right, that's an example from a transformation that Dave did early in his career. So you see a same type of curve, right? And so my hypothesis, I would say it's an assertion. My assertion is it takes insightful leadership to make this kind of improvement happen. So the question is, you've both been involved in a number of transformations over your careers. Jim, 25 years at Disney, Dave, 30 years in senior executive positions in a number of different retail organizations. What have you learned from those 25, 30 years of transformation work, specifically that people can take away in the context of this kind of disruptionary period, so to speak?
Well, I think many of you that are on the webinar today have been involved in some form of transformation before, and it looks different from the different perspectives for sure. Generally, in a high-performing organization, there's a level of trust in the people that are driving the transformation that they're driving it the right way. There have been accidents along the way. Certainly, lots of organizations transformed in an inappropriate way for the marketplace and suffered, but for the most part, you have a good sense of whether you're going in the right direction. The key elements of that transformation tend to be pretty straightforward. They're around process, technology, around people, and around strategy in the marketplace, and those things can get done. But what I see constantly overlooked is the lack of the focus on getting the organization aligned on what that transformation looks like, what the time frame is for that transformation, where you're starting off from. So you got the starting point and you got the finishing point, and you have the distance in between, the length of time that you're expected to close that gap. And then what's your role in it with respect to helping all those around you? That alignment is something that seems to be overlooked a lot in organizations that go through this transformation. And, we found it ourselves where we look at a business case, or we look at elements of making change within an organization. We say, this makes logical sense. We should be doing that. Let's just go do it. But people view that differently. And so their attachment to it, their sense of urgency around it is all different. And it's really important to get alignment around that.
Yeah, Scott, just to build on what David's saying, I think a lot of folks think leadership and think of making decisions in the moment. I think in terms of what we're talking here, it's leadership in terms of planning ahead and thinking ahead for a moment that will follow. So using the surfing analogy that Jim introduced and we've been talking about, a lot of the conversation to this point has been, okay, we're ready, we're prepared, we're looking for what's about to hit us. What external catalyst is going to hit us that we need to react to? Well, long before professional surfers get out in the water and watch for those waves, they're doing all of that pre-work in terms of making sure they're fit, healthy, they've got the right equipment, they've got the right training schedule, a lot of those components. So as I think about what makes us successful for these transformational times and moments, it's really about that preparation. I think that's what Dave was alluding to too, in terms of making sure your processes are streamlined and integrated and drive value, making sure your people are clear on their roles and responsibilities and are empowered to innovate. That takes material time and investment, conscious focus ahead of time to make sure you're ready to go. And then making sure you have the right data analytics and technology in place to support that decision-making. And then that the strategy is supporting that, the organizational framework is supporting that. So organizations can continue to run their business while at the same time looking for those next jump transformational business opportunities moving forward. But to me, leadership is anticipating that and knowing that that's a position that I need to have my organization well centered in. So as I watch for these next waves coming in, I can quickly select and then take advantage of them as they present themselves.
And Caitlin made a comment. Sounds like there's a need for change managers to help facilitate those transformations. And Caitlin, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's where we're headed with this conversation. You're a little bit ahead of us, but I'll go ahead and jump in. Well, actually, Dave, I would say in all of the engagements that I've been involved with you over our 30 years of knowing each other, either as an external consultant to help you with things or as an academic advisor or full-time, I was a vice president reporting to you at MDS. Back when you started Loblaws, you created an industrial engineering function that grew to some 60 people that essentially was doing operational excellence. It really was an OpEx group. That's what we would call it today. And every one of your industrial engineers was not only a good industrial engineer, but they were a change master. We trained them how to manage change, right? They were good project managers. At MDS, we created a business process improvement function as part of the enterprise shared service group. So you had HR, finance, IT, BPI, right? Supply chain management. And so, all the organizations that I've been a part of, Hudson's Bay Company, Sears Canada, which unfortunately wasn't successful, but we had a great change management group there. You were the transformation officer. In all of those organizations, we had a PMO essentially. That's job it was. So, most of the leaders in an organization are running the business. They're doing what you and I call the A work, right? So they're selling things. They're doing what it takes to run the business and execute the business. But then you got this group of people that are building the business, that are improving what we do and how we do it. And so it's really that group of people that in my opinion, in the great companies, that function is well developed and well honed, and there's consistency to it. In the pretty good companies, it's either not there or it's not very good.
Yeah, and Caitlin, the part that I would add to your comment is not so much about having a change management department or group. And I'll use a couple other analogies. When we build quality into an organization, whether it's manufacturing organization, service business, or a retail operation for that matter, you don't have a quality department who's the only group responsible for quality. And with risk, you don't have a risk group who's the only group thinking about risk. And same thing with people skills, right? You don't want people skills concentrated in HR or the people group and nobody else to have people skills. It's really important to drive those change management skills through and thinking through the organization, because change managers cannot be everywhere all the time. And sometimes we've seen it where organizations have tagged people as change managers or brought them in, and they're off to the side in a staff role and attend meetings, but it's not bringing the capability and the competency throughout the organization, which is what's really required to be efficient and effective in transformations. And so we end up with people saying, well, I'm over here and I want to be up here and I want to improve performance. And then we work with them to figure out what does it take, here's where you are, here's where you got to be. Well, and they go, wow, that's a lot of work. Those are a lot of projects. We can't do all that stuff. We got a day job. Well, what's the risk of not doing it? Are you still going to be in business if you don't? What's the competitive nature out there? Are you going to be able to achieve it in a different way? And if not, we have to figure out how to close that gap. And that's where that change management capability and competency has to be throughout the organization. It can be driven from a few key people that really have knowledge on how to build that within the organization. But I want to make sure that I'm really clear that it doesn't work when it becomes a staff position or function.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the next question. I'm just going to flip through these are the slides again that are going to augment that conversation we just had. Take your time, get a copy of the presentation, take your time, look through these things. If you have questions, get back to us. Jim threw this out. My next question is going to relate to this innovation cycle model, which I like, because I think there's a business version of this and there's a personal version. So there's a version of this that's at the individual personal level. But I want us to talk about insightful leadership in the context of productivity improvement and productivity improvement initiatives, OpEx programs. One of the things we know, Jim, is that different organizations are going to be in different situations in terms of what they got to do. Not everybody's the same, right? Mm-hmm. And so I like this slide from, I think we borrowed it from McKinsey. You think about the depth and length of industry demand disruption, the extent of business model disruption. You've got situations where, you don't have to do too much, right? So we saw, again, back to Jim's presentation, we saw boom to boom, right? So we saw Amazon, boom to boom, or boom to boomer, right? It was even more. And then we saw Clorox, sort of, I don't know, doom, but doom to boom, right? All of a sudden, a whole new demand exponentially increased. Zoom, right? Think about what happened to Zoom and equivalents, right? So the question is, how do we create or leverage insightful leadership? Depending, I know it's situational dependent, so that's that variations on the theme question. But how do we begin to leverage insightful leadership, whether it be inside the company or outside the company, to improve agility and resilience? That was sort of the focus of this whole webinar, is how do we make our productivity improvement efforts more resilient? So what are your thoughts on this?
David, you want me to go or you want to go?
Sure, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, Scott, I think there's two answers to that question. There's a lot of answers to that question, quite frankly. So I'm interested to hear what David says. But I think the first thing organizations must do is they must build that development or culture of continuous improvement, continuous innovation. And that's what David was alluding to as well with his feedback of, you can't make it a department thing. You have to have the capacity for driving value-added continuous improvement across the organization. So I think insightful leadership recognizes that and knows that they have to build that culture, throughout. I think the second, so that's, if you think of that as sort of the what you have to do, I think the how you have to do it, it's not a one and done effort. It's going to take a conscious effort, a conscious investment of time and energy and resource. It's going to take championship from the senior levels in the organization. This can't be, while a lot of the work needs to be done bottoms up, if the senior levels don't buy into it and don't work to create that culture, it's not going to thrive or it's not going to grow. It takes support from those analytical, critical thinking, maybe unbiased thinking, subject matter expert resources that can come alongside teams within the organization that want to move the work forward, but don't have maybe the analytical horsepower or access to the technology or some of the tools that can come help them do that. And then it takes engagement from the full organization to really push that forward. But to me, that's the fuel that drives the cycle that you've got on this page forward. So
I think those are all really important points to note, Jim. Well said. But what I'd add is if you take a step back and look at your organization, organizational culture have styles to them. So I'll talk about four styles. So the first one is reactive. You know, something goes wrong. Wow, supply chain disruption. Figure out how to get that product here, fly it here, whatever you need to do. You know, and then, oh, we're short labor. Hire more recruiters, you know, pay 10% more temporarily, give them bonuses, signing bonuses, that kind of thing. So really reacting to the marketplace. There are others that are aware of, wow, we got a labor shortage here. You know, what can we do? And so they work a way to fix it. The third level is proactive. So it's, we see that there are going to be labor shortages here. You know, we see that that there could be labor shortages and we don't know what they are. There could be disruptions to the supply chain. So we build things within our organization to make them a little more resilient to those areas. The fourth level is anticipating. So not only building, you know, barriers and protections against things that might happen, but being able to anticipate that they're going to happen. Mm-hmm. And that's a different style. And you might have multiple styles within your organization, depending on what the departments are and functional areas and the leadership are like. But the more that we can be in that anticipating mode or style, then the easier it is for us to be agile, to be insightful, to have foresight and use that foresight in a way that's meaningful and adds value to the organization.
So do you, this notion of insightful leadership, do you, I think that there's different kinds of insights, right? So there's insights about how do I run a business, right? There's operations insights. And then there's how do I improve what I do and how I do it insights. And so I think that it's, again, it goes back to what we call the A side, administering the business, running the business versus building the business, right? And it seems to me that what I think we've seen in our work with other organizations is that most organizations are pretty good on the A side of things. They know their business, they run it pretty well. There may be waste and inefficiency, but generally speaking, they've been successful and they are being reasonably successful. Now, is there a gap between what could be, what they could create, and what they are? The answer is yes. And so it's do they see that gap? Is there a shared vision? Is there a sense of what's possible? I think that's one of the things that I see most missing is that, and I think that's what Jim Collins found in his book, is that people don't see the possibilities. They don't see the white space. That's what he found in the pretty good companies. They were taking $1 and making it 1,000, and somebody else was making it 6,400. They couldn't see 6,400. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the big issues is sometimes I think organizational leadership needs help to see what's possible.
Right.
And then get alignment around that. And you did that. I thought you did that at Loblaws very well.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, it's investing time in that. So to the extent that your A job or your day job takes 100% of your time and you aren't able to rise above that and say, what are the possibilities? What is the competitive environment like? Could the value of this organization be?
Yeah.
Then you're not necessarily thinking about what a step function improvement in the organization would be. You may be thinking just about incremental improvements to the organization.
Exactly.
And that may, in some cases, not be sufficient.
Right.
It goes back to what we talked about right in the very beginning, which is the rate of improvement of an organization over time.
Yeah. And And so once I think a group of leaders can see what's possible. So some insightful leader has to say, we're going to spend some time and talk about what's possible, right? And then you have to, that conversation has to be facilitated, and it has to come together, right? So, like when you spent, I don't know, Dave, at Loblaws, just to pick an example, I think you said you spent 6 months creating the shared vision.
The shared vision, yeah, that's right.
And then you had an official ceremony where you got in front of 200 people, and all the senior leaders signed that vision, signed that vision statement.
We did sign it. And what was surprising to me is when we did sign it, we passed it around the room, and all the leaders signed it. I expected, us all to say, clap and cheer and say, yeah, we did it. And there was silence. Just somber silence. And I realized everybody just realized what we had signed up for, and that it was going to be a lot of work. And there were some risks to it because we hadn't done it before. And that we were facing a daunting mountain that we were about to climb.
Yeah.
But what you're touching on, David, is a key point in terms of having everyone align around the vision and goals. And I know we've seen that with clients and even within our own organization, how critical that is, and yet how difficult that can be in getting that. So
it is, absolutely. And when we talk about vision and strategy, and Jim, you know this about me, I love picking a particular day in the future. So it's, if you've got a 3-year plan, all right, let's make it September 27th, 2025. What does the business look like then? So it gets really precise. You can look at the multitude of dimensions around that. Once you have clarity of that vision, then you can figure out the path.
Yeah.
And then people understand what their roles and responsibilities are around that strategic pathway.
Yeah. And Scott,
go ahead, Jim.
Sorry to interrupt. Before we jump to the next point, I wanted to pick up too on what you were talking about with that opportunity cost, or in that case, lost piece. I think that's a great way of thinking. And one of my former clients at Disney thought that way as well. And actually, we would structure our reporting and our goals and our objectives against that. Call it theoretical, but whatever you will, it's that stretch opportunity. And even though we may have been exceeding last year's goals and or exceeding the target, we were always comparing to, but what was the opportunity, and how can we close the gap between that opportunity, and where we are? Forget, it's great we're beating plan and we're doing now, but where are we against that opportunity? And I thought that was a great way to be thinking about it.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got a bunch of slides in here, and we pulled some slides from a presentation that Jim did back in the spring. Again, I think it was April, Jim. And so if you want to see more information about some guidance on resilience, Jim's done a really nice job of, and I didn't get all the animation out of here, but he's done a really nice job of putting together some definitions of resilience and then talking you through sort of step by step, what does resilience look like? So I'd encourage you to look at that and study it. And if you got questions, reach out to Jim, reach out to me, and we'll be glad to talk with you about that. So the next question is, so once I got that shared vision, once I have that sense of, hey, we've got $1 and it could be 6,400 or it could be 1,000, right? Our mental model, we've been taking $1 and making it 1,000, but it's possible that it could be 6,400. And so everybody sort of get a sense of that. So we're trading at $6, Dave, and it could be $60. Can you see $60? And at first people go, no, $60 isn't possible. Or you open to the possibility that it could be 60. And people start to grasp that. And then if you got them living at 60, they turn around and look back and they say, how did we get to 60? That's a different exercise than if I'm at 6 and I got this hill, that steep hill that goes up to 60, and I'm trying to figure out how I climb this hill, right?
Right.
It's a pull instead of a push, different kind of motivation.
Right, and a lot of it's around leadership and having that relentless vision of what is possible and doing it in a way that's compelling and sharing it in a way that's compelling so people get excited about it and they see progress along the way.
Yeah.
And
So
it's back.
let's talk a little bit about, so Dave, we talked about shared vision. Let's talk a little bit about creating migration strategies, because a lot of the work that you and Jim are doing right now with companies is they have a sense of what done looks like. They have a sense of the future state. They're all mucked up and they're muddling in the current state. And really, you come in and you help create a migration path for them that will migrate them logically, effectively, efficiently towards that future state. What are your thoughts on how you can share with our audience? How do you do that? How do you go about doing that with an organization?
I think there's a lot of confusion out in organizations right now, and we've seen it a few times, Jim, where, we talk to individuals within an organization and they've got a lot of projects they're involved with. They have to make all these changes and do their day job. And so, they're dealing with shortages of people that they've got within their group. And they've got these new initiatives that are coming from corporate or part of corporate. And so they cannot get at them today because there's a labor crisis. So they put them in their backpack, right? And then, finance department has a new idea on better controls. So they take that project and put it in their backpack. Pretty soon they're walking around with a 50-pound backpack on of projects that they're attached to, but they haven't really had time to make successfll. And part of the reasons the organizations tend to really simplify this. So Scott, you know that we've faced this a number of times with CEOs that say, well, we only have 10 projects or we only have 5 projects. And I've shown them, no, you don't. Actually, you got 260 and we've only been here for 2 weeks to discover them. And they don't realize that all these things are going on because it's not just at the corporate level that the projects happen, but it's at the division level and the department level and the work team level. And so there are lots of projects underway, and getting clear on what fits that strategic pathway. Because we've seen a lot of organizations that have a vision of where they want to be, but they don't have the pathway there. And so they just keep talking about the vision and somehow hoping that they're going to end up there. But everybody has a different sense of how far away that vision is. Some think it's real close and some think it's far away. Some individuals think their organization's great, so the gap's almost closed, and others are saying, oh no, we're far from it and we'll never get there. And so getting those people to understand what they need to do to move forward, and getting clarity on the benefits of each of the projects, and then what it takes to make it work, and then taking a holistic view of the organization and saying, how much change can we fit into the next year or 18 months, and manage the risks associated with that. Right.
Yeah, and Scott, just to build on what David's saying, I think all of our natural tendency is to want to get out of the gate fast and let's start running down the path with this project because we want to get to results quickly. And what I hear David saying, and what we saw at Disney that aligns with that for projects that were successful, was taking that upfront time to make sure you've got alignment and clarity, the measures of success, what done looks like. All of those pieces up front are critical to success longer term, and critical to speed, because we always said move slow to move fast. Move slow at the front, make sure you've got that alignment, make sure you've got that clarity, make sure you've got the resourcing and technology and tools and data that you need, and then accelerate through the process to get to those results fast. So
I don't have this slide in here, but Dave and I have used this, what we call the ABCD model, where A is administer the business, run the business, C is cater to crises, D is do the dumb, and then B is build the business. So improve what we do and how we do it. And if you thought about how we spend our time in organizations, whether you're a supervisor or a C-suite person or a ops manager, plant manager, you got that pie chart and you got 40 hours, 50 hours, whatever you got, and you can pretty much divide that pie chart up into those 4 things, those 4 categories, right? And so what Dave and I have always talked about is the C and the D drive the B out. So the catering to crisis, the fighting fires, and the doing the dumb, the waste consumes so much time. And so A comes first, do my job comes first, and then I got to fight the fires, and I got all this waste that's causing my A to be burdensome, causing my A to be less effective and efficient than it could be. And so what happens is the organization, budget-wise, Jim, the organization doesn't really have much B time because it hasn't learned how to get rid of the C and the D in a systematic way. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when you're starting a transformation, it's like this wedge, and you're trying to slam a wedge of B into it, and the C and the D is strong, and it just keeps popping it out. Every time you quit hitting it, it pops the B out. It pops the, you know, the improvement stuff out. So that's, I think, insightful leadership understands that phenomenon.
Yeah, and I think there are little things that creep up. So I'm sure many of you are suffering through this now. We hear lots of complaints about there are so many meetings. You know, I'm in meetings all the time, and I don't have time to do my job because I'm in all of these meetings. And I've got a very simple rule about meetings. It's no prisoners, no tourists. So if you don't want to be there, don't be there. And if you're there just to observe, but you're not contributing, figure another way to get updated and save your time. And we've gone into large, well-known organizations and cut 50% of their person hours from meetings.
Yep. Yeah. So let's flip through. So there's some good slide matter in here that you can look at that supports the conversation we just had. The speed of trust is an important conversation. The integration of the measure what matters, John Doerr's work, OKRs, sprints, agile, that's all part of the equation. Dave mentioned the integration of strategy, process, technology, and people. That's really what it's all about. So again, feel free to look at that. So this next question, and I think this is the next to last question here, and it goes back to a conversation we had a little bit earlier, and I mentioned that we were going to get to it. So in a lot of the organizations you're working with, Dave and Jim, you're setting up PMOs. You're setting up a group that is sort of owns B. So just talk briefly about what your advice is in terms of how do you kick it up a notch? How do leaders kick it up a notch in terms of improving how effective and efficient they are at B work, building the business?
Well, certainly a big part of it right in the beginning is planning. So understanding what you've got to do, how much work you've got to do. And, you know, it seems so obvious, but there's so many organizations that don't take even a moment to figure out how much work they've got to do. And then who's going to do it? Who's the best person to do it? And choosing somebody who's handy and has capacity isn't always the best strategy.
Yeah.
Execute well. But we've seen that happen a lot as well.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to be planful, and you have to be thoughtful. You have to be disciplined in the approach. Understand that upfront work that Jim was talking about, you know, go slow to go fast, is really important. And planning it out, making sure people are aligned, manage that communication front, two-way to get input on what's going to go wrong with this as we go forward, what are the implications of it, and get real clarity on what we call what done looks like. So when you're done the project or the initiative, what does it look like? What have you accomplished? And get real clarity on that, because that tends to drift over time, especially with Agile.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott, the other thing I would add to what David said, I would just to build on that, is I think organizationally, we really have to get our heads wrapped around data. You know, at the end of the day, so much of the insights that we glean and leverage as business scientists is generated from our data set. And it's shocking the number of organizations that really don't have a good grasp on their data or a good handle on their data, or we have our analyst team or our highly paid engineers spending 85% of their time just trying to pull data into a report
Yep.
somebody else can look at, instead of flipping that model on its head and having systems and structure and technology that only requires 15% of our time to pull the data into a reporting mechanism that provides insights that we can then drive, our business forward with. So looking at that infrastructure, understanding our data, understanding our technology, is critically important to be successful.
100%. That's so in almost every engagement, we've got ERP, Power BI sitting on top of ERP, and then SharePoint sitting on top of Power BI, creating visualization so that we can see longitudinal data over time, and we understand what's happening, and we understand whether we're impacting the measures that matter, right? So we're running out of time here. We're gonna jump real quickly. I got a bunch of slides in there on that, and now we're gonna jump to just this last. I'm just gonna run through real quickly for the benefit of our attendees. So these are sort of our key points. So disruptions are the new norm. I think that's what we've got to sort of accept and acknowledge. It is what it is. We are where we are. We can't change that, but we can change our attitudes and actions. So we can change our mindsets around how we approach addressing these disruptions. We didn't talk a lot about, but we did allude to the fact that different organizations are in different situations. So the strategy isn't exactly the same for every organization. But we did again suggest that insightful leadership is a critical to success factor in no matter what situation you're in. The general strategy for creating resilient organizational excellence, we talked a lot about. We talked about how do you create the shared vision? How do you create the migration strategy? We talked about PMOs or BPI functions. And then, smooth seas don't make skillful sailors. So, you've got experts in the marketplace that you can partner with and team with that have been down the path before. Many organizations, again, are good at A, they've been successful at A, but they're not necessarily successful or skillful at B. So there is opportunities for you to leverage insightful leadership specialists that are skillful at building B initiatives in an organization. And then I think, Dave, I threw this slide in because, again, this is sort of a capstone slide for us. I think it goes back to a lot of the advice that you gave as we were going along during this hour. These 5 words are really important to being successful in transformations.
Absolutely. We've seen that when these 5 things are effectively happening within an organization, its speed of change is incredible because it creates an organization that you can trust.
Okay, so real quickly, contact information. If you want to get a hold of Dave, if you want to get a hold of Jim, Nathan is going to share some links with you. If you want to get copies of the presentations. So this is the IISE Performance Excellence webinar link. You can go to the IISE website. You'll be able to see the recording and the deck for this presentation in a couple of days. If you want to see a blog for this session and a YouTube version of the webinar, you can go to the TPG YouTube channel. If you want more information about IISE, how to join if you aren't a member, as well as other training offerings and services, James Swisher is the director for that initiative. I work very closely with James. If you want to know more about the Global Performance Excellence webinar series or the Operational Analytics Certification Program, I do that for IISE, so feel free to reach out. We've got an upcoming webinar on the 4th. We've got Gabe Burnett, who's the Director and Chief Engineer of Industrial Engineering at Boeing, and Jim Tompkins. And they're going to do a slightly different webinar. They're going to look back they're going to do a retrospective on their life and career, and they're going to share with you some of the key choice points that they had over their life. David has done one of these, Jim did one of these too, and they're a lot of fun. They're a little different, but they're really interesting. I think particularly, Dave, for our young professionals and students, it's sort of refreshing to see some of these people that have been, very successful in their lives and careers share, some of the spots where I could have gone this way, and why did I do this?
Absolutely. You can learn a lot from the careers of these two great leaders.
We got webinars just ahead. This is a list of webinars. You'll be able to see those. And that's it. So I think it was mission accomplished. Boy, we crammed a lot into an hour, didn't we?
You did.
Good job, Scott.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.
Yes, good conversation.
Stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jim.
Bye.